And Nicole, if you'd like to introduce our lovely speaker.
Yes, I know that I'm very excited to hear this presentation about leveling up our plots, tips and tricks to enhance the storytelling capabilities of our data visualizations in R. And our speaker today is Cara Thompson. She is a freelance data consultant with an academic background based in Edinburgh, Scotland. She specialized in creating clear and engaging data visualizations and in automating data-related processes to free up time for experts to invest in their own areas of expertise. She is a regular contributor to projects that are for the rest of us and enjoys the diversity that comes with working with a broad range of clients. Some of her recent highlights include reworking data visualizations for a paper under review and creating an R package for a research group which applies the same aesthetic to all their plots. And she's passionate about helping people make the most out of their data. And with that, I'll turn it over to Cara. And like I said, looking forward to your presentation.
Great, thank you very much. Hi everyone, thank you for having me in your group. It's a real honor to have been asked to come and give this presentation to you. And my main aim is for this to be a really useful session for you. Both in terms of now, during this time, to help you think about some things, but also in the future by making all these resources things that you can revisit in your own time. Oh, I was going to share my screen, but I'm not sure that I have permission to do that.
There you go, you should now.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So hopefully you can all see my slide. Can I get a thumbs up from someone? Yeah, brilliant. So we're going to be talking about leveling up our plots tonight. Well, this evening. It's tonight for me. It's 10 p.m., but it's the evening still for you guys. So we're going to be talking about how to enhance the storytelling capabilities of the data visualizations that we're creating. We've already done a bit of introduction. So as we've said, I'm Cara Thompson. My background is in psychology, where I gained a PhD over 10 years ago now. And then I spent 10 years in the world of postgraduate medical examinations, analyzing the data to do with those exams, feeding back the results to the various stakeholders. And during that time, taught myself to use R so that we could automate a lot of our work and free up time for the bits that actually needed expertise in that context. And then about a year and a bit ago, I set up my own consultancy business, specializing in database and in what I'm going to call enhanced reproducible outputs. What I mean by that is really nicely formatted documents that have got all your calculations, your plots and stuff in them, or going from your data frame to publication ready plot, those kind of things. And what drives me in all of this is helping others maximize the impact of their expertise. So that's by freeing up time that you can spend on the things that actually do need your expertise, but also maximizing the impact in terms of making the research understandable and memorable to the end users, which I get quite excited about. So the goal for today, as I've said, is to give you some useful design tips and coding tricks so that you can apply these to your own plots. So we're not going to go too crazy in terms of the geometries and the plot designs. We're going to stick to stuff that I'm hoping is going to be really useful for your next paper or presentation or whatever you want to do with your data. We're going to illustrate ways in which we can use color and text to communicate the story more clearly. We're going to share the code behind this and introduce ggtext on top of the ggplot2 package that you've already had a look at. I'm going to provide resources that you can revisit in your own time. The slides are going to be available at the link. If you click on it now, you'll get to a page where it says it's coming soon. So don't do that. But I mean, do it if you want to, but you won't find anything there. And whenever we touch on a topic that I don't think we've got time to cover in full within our session, I've provided a link that you can go to and read more about it. And at the end, we're going to do some Q&A with some feedback about your own plots. So hopefully that sounds like a sensible idea. But before we get going with this, I'm going to ask you to take a moment and suspend all disbelief and follow me in an adventure about what the Palmer Penguins got up to last weekend. So last weekend, the Palmer Penguins decided that they would set up a competition across the species and across the islands. And the competition was to decide which species could bake the best banana loaf. So we're going to go on the first episode ever of the Great Penguin Bake Off and talk about what they got up to and how they got on. So each penguin species was given a different type of banana to bake with. And the higher the bar here, the yummier the cake. We're looking at yumminess scores. Now, I haven't added a legend here, but just by changing the colors, you've probably got an idea of which penguin species was given the underripe bananas, the ripe bananas, and the overripe bananas. So let's remember that. Next, the Adelie penguins decided that they were going to run an extra experiment on top of this and vary the amount of unripe banana that they added into their banana loaf mix. And again, I've not added a legend, but just by using transparency, you've probably got an idea of who had the highest concentration of unripe banana in their banana loaf mix. And finally, each penguin was allowed to decide how long they wanted to bake their banana loaf for. And so if I ask you to tell me which species tended to keep their banana loaves in the oven for longer, you'll be looking at this plot. And some of you might be starting to do this. So let's just flip it around and I'll make it a bit easier. We've got duration going from left to right, which makes a lot more sense. And we can see that the gentoos tended to take their loaves out of the oven a wee bit sooner than the other ones did. Now, yes, that was totally crazy. And we're going to pause here in our episode of the Great Penguin Bake Off. But the idea is to show you tips that we can use to tell a story, and yes, any story, with the plots that we've got and make it memorable to the audiences that we're trying to communicate with. And what we've done here actually is illustrated the first of the 7 tips that I'm going to illustrate for you this evening, the first 2. So we've used color and transparency purposefully, and we used intuitive orientations. We haven't added any text whatsoever to our plots, but just by doing that, we have made it easier to tell the story from the data that we have. We're also going to look, of course, at how we can add text and how we can do that well. And we'll finish off looking at how we give everything a bit of space to breathe, because it can get quite busy when we've got a big story to tell with the data that we've got. In case I lost you with the totally bonkers start to this talk about the penguin baking competition, the color is all about making it easy for readers to remember what's what. And you might think, well, my research isn't about bananas. Fair enough, you'll have to think of some different colors. If you can, do try to make your colors meaningful. If there really is no reality in which to anchor your colors, then consistency is going to be the key. But I thought I would just share with you a research project that I've been helping build plots for recently, just to illustrate how I went about it in that context. So the researchers had looked at the perception of videos, and the ratings of those videos were dependent on whether the video was completely human-made, partly automated, or fully automated. And so I chucked artificial intelligence into Google Images and saw what came out. And when you do that, you get a lot of images with a kind of blue-gray background. Typically, there's some kind of purple, orange, pink coming out that ties it to a human brain or a hand or something like that. So this is the color palette that I went for. I called one of the colors machine, the other one human, and then I blended the 2 together so that you can see the progression from one to the next. So hopefully this is a useful illustration, and if nothing else, you can have a wee chuckle at the quote about being hopefully not twisted and evil when we're making our plots. So without further ado, let's get coding. We're going to first set up a basic plot, and then we're going to modify that. And at each tip, we're going to revisit how we've changed the plot from what it was to where it is after we've applied that tip. So we're going to use, as I said, the data from the Palmer Penguins library, which you can use in your own time to experiment with these things. And then I'm just going to load the whole tidy mess because we're going to be using ggplot. We're also going to be using a bunch of packages that are useful for manipulating data. And this saves us loading them all one by one. The next step is to modify our data set a little bit, because we talked about the banana quantity that the penguins added into their mix. So we need to add a variable to capture that. And to do that, we're using this really useful function called case when. And all we're saying there is when the species is Adelie and the island is Bisco, then they used the full amount of banana. When the species is Adelie and the island is Dream, then they used not as much banana. And then when it's Adelie and Torgerson, they used just a very small hint of unripe banana. And true is basically your catch-all for everything else. So everything that doesn't meet these conditions above. So everybody else put the full amount of banana into their cake mix. Let's just take a quick look and see what it looks like in our data frame. So here are the unique combinations that we've got of all of those variables. So it looks like the code did what we need it to do. Great, we can now go forth and plot. So we're going to put the data from the penguins that we've created into ggplot, and we're going to set the x-axis as the bill depth, and that's going to be our proxy for the duration that stuff stayed in the oven for. The y-axis is going to be bill length, and that's going to be the yumminess of our cakes. And we're going to color everything by species. We can't just stop there. We've got to add a geometry to use. So we're going to use geom_point, and we're going to set the alpha aesthetic to be banana quantity, so that the less banana there was, the more transparent the dot is going to be. You might be curious as to why I've put x, y, and color inside the main ggplot call rather than inside geom_point. It's because we're going to reuse these with a bunch of different data that we're going to feed into the plot later. So with every single data set that we're going to feed in, I want the color to be consistent and to consistently signify the species that is attached to the data. This will become clearer as we progress. So let's have a look at what we've got. We've got ourselves a perfectly functional, very basic ggplot. It's always a good starting point. The first thing that I would recommend you do at this point is just change your theme to minimal. That gets rid of the grey background and makes it just a little bit less busy and a lot nicer to look at, in my opinion. We're going to change the base text size so it's a bit bigger because it was a bit too small to see what we were doing there. And then we're going to tweak the range of the transparency so that even the lightest of dots can be seen. So let me just flick back between those, and you can see the lightest dots become a bit more visible by just tweaking that. Next, what we want to do is add our story. We spent a lot of time researching how the individual penguins did in this bake-off, and so we need to be able to write up a bit of a summary about that. So we've added in a title, we've added in a subtitle, some axes, labels, and a caption in which I'm totally owning the fact that we're misusing the Palmer Penguins dataset. That's fine. You'll notice in the code in this presentation, I'm doing some slightly funny things in terms of indentation. That's just so that it stays visible for us all here. The indentation doesn't change the way that your code runs. I'm just trying to help us all see as much of it as we can. So let's take a look at what we've got. And we've got ourselves, frankly, a bit of a mess. It's fine. It's got the points there. It's got all the text in there that we need, but some of it's off to the side of the plot. It doesn't fit. And there's just a lot going on. Now, we might not have done ourselves any favors with the text size. So let's just make the size a little bit smaller. Okay, it looks a bit better. It is perfectly functional, but I think we can do a lot better than this in terms of making our story stand out. So let's start applying the tips that we talked about earlier. The first one is to use color purposefully. These are the three colors that we're going to be using. All I did for that was look at colors of bananas online and then plot them into a color picker tool and picked out the colors that corresponded to each type of banana. Fairly straightforward, and I've popped a link to that in another slide. Transparency, we've already taken care of in the alpha aesthetic. So what we need to do now is make the species map to those banana colors. The quick fix way to do that is to add scale color manual and pop your values in, just like this. And that gives us dots that are colored as we've said they were going to be. Now, the trouble with that is that it can be slightly dangerous. Say you've got your plot sorted, you've got your script written, you go away on annual leave, and you come back to find that some keen bean in your lab has pointed out that actually species should have been a factor, and it's an ordered factor. So I'm just going to go and fix that in your data frame. And you go and rerun your plots, and you've not changed anything about the code in your plots, but keep your eye on the plots, and I'll flip back. The colors have moved. Now, you don't want that to happen, especially if you'd left them in charge for a week and you were just going to submit it when you got back. you end up in a bit of a mess. So here is the way to avoid that. You want to be creating a named list. And within that named list, you can say this species corresponds to this color, which then means that whether or not you turn it into a factor and order it, the colors stay put. So that makes everything a lot safer. So that's the way that we're going to do it. We're going to apply that color tip to our basic plot, and we've got it all done nice and safely. I'll pause at this point and say choosing colors is tricky. It's a really hard thing to do in your data viz. So there are 3 ways that I suggest you do it. 1, start from a photo and use something you like, or something like image color picker to pick out the colors in the photo that you think are relevant. And it doesn't have to be a photo that's of something that you're researching. It can just be a photo where you think the composition looks really nice and you can pick out different colors from within that. imagecolorpicker.com does actually suggest a color palette based on the photo that you feed it. So if you've got an aesthetic that you really like, it's worth giving that a shot. You can take inspiration from other data visualizations that you've seen or some art that you like. It's always worth visiting a few art galleries every now and then. If you want to start from the color wheel and go from first principles, then I really recommend this blog post from Data Wrapper. It just gives you a really good overview of how the color wheel works, how to make it work within a data viz context, and basically how to make your visualizations look really professional by applying a few principles of color visualization. So let's summarize what we've done with the color. All we've done is change the color of the dots, but already we're making the story a bit more memorable. You can see basically green bananas do not make tasty cake. That's the lesson that we're learning here from this data. Yumminess is along our y-axis, and yeah, if you've made your banana loaf with green bananas, it's not going to be particularly yummy. So we can now use the next tip. The next tip is intuitive orientations. The good news with this is that for most of the plots that you're going to create, there's a quick fix, which is just to add chord flip into your code, and that will change it from one direction to the other. Now we've already done the right thing here. We've got duration along the x-axis, so we can just give ourselves a good pat on the back and move on to the next tip. But it's worth thinking, if you were to draw the data from scratch, how would you talk about it? Or if you're talking about it and you're moving your hands while you talk, which I'm clearly doing at the moment, then which way are you moving your hands when you're suggesting that something has increased in value? And it's worth thinking about what you naturally do and trying to capture that in your plot. The next tip is to add some color to our text to help our readers orient themselves when they're looking at the plots. And this is where ggtext comes in. ggtext is a really fantastic package that I use in most of my plots. And what it allows us to do is write some essentially CSS syntax around the text that we've got, which allows you to change your colors or your fonts or the font size or anything that you would normally control with CSS really on the fly within one piece of text. So here is how it works. First, you have to load the library, and then you can do things like this. So here we've got our title, in which we're saying banana loaves when baked with ripe. Yeah, banana loaf tastes better when baked with ripe or overripe bananas. And what we've done is we've got the word ripe, and around that we're putting a span, which tells us that we want the color of that word ripe. Oh, sorry, is there a question?
Can everyone make sure to mute themselves?
I was going to say, if you do have questions, I've asked Christian and Nicole to try and keep track of those and interrupt me if there's any pressing issue that I need to address. But otherwise, we'll hopefully have a good chance for a quick Q&A at the end. So what we're doing here is we've got the word ripe, and we're surrounding it with a span and telling it that we want that to be the color that corresponds to the species that we're baking with ripe bananas. And we've done the same with overripe. We're surrounding it with a span that tells it to use this color when we're writing the text. If we do a plot there, it doesn't work. It's just printed the text, which I'm going to repost here so we can see it a bit more clearly. So here we've got ripe, the word, and it's surrounded with the span that gives it the text value. The reason why that didn't work is because we need to make one further modification to our code. which is to add element markdown to our theme. And once we've done that, you can see that the color of the text has changed. Now, you need to be careful with this, because if you've picked a color that doesn't stand out nicely against a white background, it's going to get hard to read. So I'm going to acknowledge that here and suggest a quick fix for our plot, which is just to make those words bold. And again, because we're using GG text, you can just add 2 asterisks either side of your word, and that will make the word bold. It's a nice little trick, and it allows you to use colors and make sure that it's still visible. So there we go, we've added some color to our text, and we're already starting to draw the reader in and tell the story just from the title, but there's still a lot of information going on there. So there's a few more things that we can do to improve the storytelling capability of this plot. Is everyone still with me just as we move on to the next one? Getting a few nods. Good. The next thing we want to do is add what we're going to call text hierarchy. To do that, we're going to manipulate the colors and the fonts that we're using. Now, text hierarchy is one of those things.
There was a question in the chat about the last point asking, can you place a contrast background around the text?
Yes, I think so. You could, I'd have to look up how you can do that. Most things are doable. What you could do is change the panel color, I think, of your plot, and that would do the trick.
But wouldn't that change the background of the entire graph?
I think you can change the background of the plot and the background of the surround independently from each other.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so we've looked at adding color, and yes, that's a really good point. That would be a good way to tweak that and make sure that everything stands out the way that you want it to. So the next thing is to add a bit of text hierarchy to our plot. And it's one of those things that it's much easier to demonstrate than it is to explain. So just take a look at this image. The concept of text hierarchy is that the way that you format your text influences what gets read first, what's least likely to get read, and how the readers are going to progress through the information that you have provided. So if you think back to our plot, everything kind of has the same attention-grabbing quality. And what we want to do is have a main headline and then more information that the readers can have a look at later. So the first thing we're going to do is create 2 more colors for our color palette. We're going to create a dark text color, which is based on the color, the yellow. And what I've done is used monochroma and said, take this color, go darker, and use the darkest as the 2 colors. Then we're creating a light text color, which is based on the dark one. So we say, take the dark text, go lighter, and take a middling one. If you take one that's too far on the light end, you're not going to be able to read it. So we're going to take a middling color for that. And then we're going to add those colors to our banana colors palette. And let's just have a look at what they look like. So here we've got 5 colors. These 3 we're using for our plots, and these 2 we're using for our text. And the neat thing about this is that they kind of tie in with it. So it's quite a useful way. If you don't know what colors to choose for your text, try and base it off one of the points. So there we go. This is where we were, although almost. I think the eagle-eyed among you will have noticed that we've got our legend has got 2 extra bits, and this is one of the things that I figured out with half an hour to go before giving this talk, because the behavior of ggplot has changed recently. So what we need to do is add limits equals force to the color scaling tool, and that drops any colors that we're not using within the point. So we don't have a species called dark text, and we don't have a species called light text, and so it's going to get rid of those from the legend. So there we go. Learning every day a school day, or as the French say, I shall go to bed less stupid. So we've got the limits force put into there. And what we're going to do now is apply these colors. So we're going to change the basic text color throughout the plot to our light text. And we've also changed the font. DM Suttons is just a nice friendly font that we can use for something that's about banana leaves and penguins. I think it feels appropriate. It might be not quite serious enough for your academic publications, but it's worth a shot. But we're going to override that with the dark text color when it comes to the title. just to make it stand out a little bit more compared to the rest of the text. We're going to change the size of the title font, change the font of it as well, and make it bold, just to really emphasize that text hierarchy that we're trying to bring in to our plot. And at this point, again, we've got a bit of a problem. The title has gone over the edge, so we're just going to add a line break, and the markdown syntax for doing that is just that BR between the brackets there. Okay, so we have made the plot look nicer, we've made the subtitle a bit more dim, and what we need to do now is just apply the same principles to the axes and the captions. What we're interested in this plot is really the trends, the direction of movement. So the values in and of themselves we can make a bit smaller, that's not the thing that we want the readers to particularly focus on. And there we have ourselves a nice plot. Now again, I'm going to pause and acknowledge that using custom fonts can be really frustrating with R. But things have improved massively over the last few years. So I started doing this when it was all extra fonts and installing and restarting your computer and figuring out what's found what where. Whereas now the recommended workflow is to install the fonts locally, then install RAG system fonts and text shaping, which are 3 packages. Set the graphic device to AGG and everything should work. I'm going to say everything should work because there's always something that's a little snag, whether it's that it's rendering fine in your viewer but it's not rendering in your markdown document or your quarter presentation, whatever it is. Here is a really, really useful post about debugging custom fonts that I highly recommend to you if you find yourself having loaded a font and it's not working. This is the one to go to, and it's even got stuff about using font awesome and icons and things that generally trip up those of us who do this all the time. So do take a look at that blog post because I think it will be helpful. And just to show you where we've got to once we've added some text hierarchy, I think you'll agree with me that it is much nicer to look at aside from anything else. You've got the story, the main story is there. There's just as much information, but it doesn't feel overwhelming in the way that it did before we did any of these tweaks. Any further questions at this point, or should we move on to the next tip? Seem okay? Okay, so the next one is to try and reduce unnecessary eye movements. So even though we've done the text hierarchy thing, we're still jumping between the legend and the points and what it says in the subtitle and which species did what. So this is the plot as it stands, and we've got to remember the colours that we've seen here when we go and look at the plot, and we've got to remember the storyline when we go to look at the plot. Ultimately, what we want to try and do is reduce the memory load for anyone looking at these plots so that the main story stands out rather than the effort of having got to grips with the story. So we're going to combine all the tips that we've talked about before and create some text boxes that we can then use instead of a legend. Now you might want to stick with the legend, but this is just a way of showing you how you can make it easier for your readers to see what's what all in the same place. So to do this, we need to create a new set of data, and we're going to call this Penguin Summaries. And all we're doing is taking the same data set, grouping it by species, and then summarizing the mean bill depth, which we've put as the duration of baking, and the mean bill length, which we've put as the yumminess. And then we're going to add some commentary into this. So when the species is Adelie, we've got some stuff about the fact that they used the Adelies were the ones that had the green bananas, and even a hint of green banana seems to be detrimental to the taste. We've got the Gentoos who used the overripe bananas, and then I think it's the chinstrap penguins to the left who used the ripe bananas and slightly longer cooking times. So we've got the data set up, and what this allows us to do, again using ggtext, is to add some text boxes. So in our text boxes here, all we're doing is reading in the data that we've just created. We've already set the X and Y in the overall ggplot call that we had at the very start of our basic plot. And then we just need to tell it what to do with the label. So the label is going to be pasting team and then species, and we're going to put asterisks either side of that to make that text bold. And then we're going to paste in the commentary. And again, with the commentary, we're going to make that the color of the light text that we had set. Because each of these text boxes belongs within a species, and because we've got color set to species already, it's automatically coloring them with the right color. So we don't need to do anything fancy to get that sorted. All we need to do is overwrite the color for the stuff where we don't want it to be colored by species. We're then going to do a bit of formatting. So we're going to change the font so that it aligns with the rest of the fonts in the plot. We have changed the size of it. We've changed the width of the box. We've made them slightly transparent so that you can still see the data peeking through behind it. And we've removed the outline of the box with box color NA. And now we can actually get rid of the legend that was on the side because we've moved the information right on top of the plot. So again, depending on the publications that you're submitting to, some of them might have quite strict guidelines about that, but it's quite a useful way of adding some information within a plot. So even if it doesn't work for a peer-reviewed publication, it can work really well in a presentation when you're just trying to tell the story and get your readers to engage with that. So there we go. We've gone from a plot where there was some good text hierarchy, but still a lot of information that you're having to jump around to see, to a plot where it just all sits nicely in a place that makes it easy to read.
I think now is maybe a good moment to bring up, there was a question in the chat, how important is it to use colorblind friendly color palettes?
So I would say it's important because you want your plots to be accessible to people, regardless of their visual perception. I think also within the academic world, it's important because a lot of people are going to be printing out the stuff in black and white. And so if you want your color palette to work when somebody's printed it out to take it with them when they're, I don't know, commuting to work or whatever, then that's an extra reason for doing it. There are some really useful tools for doing that. The package called Colorblinder has got a tool in it that you can feed your color palette to. Well, you can feed the whole plot to actually. So you can create your plot and then call, I think it's CVD grid from Colorblinder, and it will spit out 4 plots that simulate what the plot looks like to people who've got different levels of color perception impairment. So that's a useful tool to explore. Did that answer the question?
I think so.
Okay, brilliant. Come back to me if it didn't.
So
we've
also
reduced.
had a second question in the chat just about the code that was on the previous screen, asking which aspect of the code put the text boxes centralized over each of the geom points.
Oh, good question. Oh, okay. So how does it centralize it here? It does that because, actually, let me go back a wee bit. When we created our summaries data, we set the bill depth to be the mean bill depth and the bill length to be the mean bill length within each species. And so then when we're creating the text box, the aesthetic is already set to X and Y being these 2 variables. So that puts the box in the right place because it says, okay, well, the coordinate for the species is the mean bill depth for that species and the mean bill length for that species. Does that make sense? So for each species, you've ended up with with an XY coordinate that is right in the middle of where those dots are because you've just taken the mean of where the dots are on the x-axis and on the y-axis.
I think that answered their question. We did get one more question as a result, kind of, which is, can we adjust the text box position and make it a different shape? Yes,
you can. Absolutely. You can change your coordinates. You can do some fancy conditional location if you want to. And actually, we're going to come on to that later with a few more text boxes that we're going to add in. So yes, absolutely, you can do that. You can change the width of your box. You can also change, I think, the radius of the corners. So you can make it perfectly square or you can make it more rounded. Yeah, ggtext is a really, really awesome package that you can do a lot of stuff with. Okay, so this is where we were. We've reduced unnecessary eye movement. We've made the story sit on top of the data. And we've got 2 more tips to go. One is to highlight important data points. So here we're going to look at how we move our text boxes and make them line up nicely with the story that we want to tell, and how we can add arrows into that as well if we want to. So in order to do this, we need to do a bit of text manipulation. I really like text manipulation in R. I think it's a really fun thing to do, and especially if you're writing reports and you're automating a lot of it, it's a fun way of making it into real sentences and adding a bit of human touch to that as well. So let's get cracking with this. First, we need to do a bit of housekeeping. So we're going to be starting from the Penguins raw dataset, which has different names in the columns to the names that are in the Penguins dataset. So we're just going to line all of that up nicely by renaming the column depth to bill depth and renaming these ones as well. And then we're going to try and find from our baking penguins our star baker, the runner-up, and the one that had to leave the tent at the end of that baking session this weekend. If you're not familiar with the show, the person who does the worst in that week has to leave and doesn't get to come back, which is a shame. Although they do come back normally for the big celebratory bake at the end, which is nice. So anyway, we want to find our star baker. That is the one that had the maximum bill length, because bill length is the yumminess score that we're using. The runner-up is the one that has the score that corresponds to the second when we sort the bill length by decrease in order. And then the one that did the worst is the one that has the lowest score on bill length. So we found the 3 penguins that we want to highlight. A bit more housekeeping. The species in this penguins raw dataset is a really long species name, but the fortunate thing is that the first word of that long name is the one that we want. So we're going to just use gsub to extract that out, and just to slow down a wee bit on what that looks like. Here are the unique species names that we have in the raw data set, and the gsub call just says take everything up to the first space and then everything after that and replace it with the first chunk, which is everything that was up to the first space. So we're just grabbing the first word from each of these long species names. There we go, a little bit of extra coding there on top of the data viz stuff. Then we want to add some commentary in. So for our star baker, we want to say our star baker is, and then we're going to use their individual penguin ID. We're going to say what species they are, which island they're from, and just say congratulations, because that feels like the right thing to do. And then we're going to find the penguin that's the runner-up, and we're going to say our runner-up is put the species in from such and such an island, this is their ID, and a bit of extra text there just to make it fun. And then the last one is, yes, the penguin that had the worst yumminess score. And so we're going to say that penguin didn't have a good baking day, and a bit of extra comments about how that is. So this is the kind of text manipulation that I'm talking about, which can make things sound a lot more human than they actually are. If you were to run it again with a different data set of penguins, you would create those sentences again for the right people. So it's, well, the right penguins. So it's quite a fun trick to use. Now what we want to do is work out where the boxes are going to be. So I'm going to use the chalkboard tool, and this should work. Yeah, so here is our runner-up. So we want to put a wee arrow here, and then some text, and then this is the star baker. So again, an arrow and some text, and you get to see how awful my handwriting is. Well, I think it is actually made worse by the tool that I'm using. And then we've got the penguin with the worst score down here, and some text. And the way we're going to make this work is to add text boxes. So let's just draw the boxes in. And what we need to figure out is what coordinate do we need to apply to each of these boxes to make them sit in the right place. I'm going to make the coordinate of the box be the starting point of the arrow, because it makes it so much easier to then align everything from there. So we want to find this point, and this point here. And then we want to add those in to our data frame. So let's go back and do that. Bit more housekeeping. We're just going to sort the penguins by bill length. Makes it easier. Retain your sanity while you're trying to figure out what do I need to put for the top one and the second one, etc. And then we're going to add the label coordinates. So we're going to say here are the label coordinates based on what we've just drawn. And then we talked a bit about positioning the boxes properly. So we're going to say if the label is going to be to the left of the point that it's pointing at, then we want you to align the box to the right side of the box to the point. And if that's not the case, then we want you to align the right side of the box, the left side of the box to the point. Left and right have never been my strong points. I play the piano, but somehow it just doesn't compute. So we know that that's what we want to do. So we're adding a bit of conditional placement for our boxes. And then we're going to do the same thing for our arrows. So we're going to say if the arrow is coming from the left of the point, then we want to stop just short of that point. And otherwise, we're going to make it stop just short of that point, but coming from the right. And the same with the Y. If it's coming from underneath, then we want to make it stop just short of it. And it's coming from on top, we want to make it stop just short of it, coming from on top. Again, this is all very theoretical, but the plot will make sense of this. So we're back to where we were, and we can add our text boxes in. So it has placed the text boxes in the right point. We've got them lined up with the 3 penguins that we want to be looking at in our data. And then we can add some arrows in. So the arrows start at the coordinate of the box, and then the end at the coordinate that we said was the X end or the Y end for the arrow. We've curved the arrows a little bit just because I think it looks nicer, and we've made the arrows slightly more transparent. Apologies, I didn't highlight that bit of code. Just again, it's that whole visual hierarchy thing. You don't want the arrow to be the main thing that you're seeing. You want the arrow to be a help in highlighting the main thing that you're pointing at. And so we've added the arrows in, and then we are just going to align the text inside the box using h-align, and that just draws the text so that it's kind of pointing us in the right direction. Okay, so the alignment of that text suggests that you're looking at something over here. Alignment of that text suggests that you're looking at something over here. Again, we've done this conditionally. If you're just doing one box, you can just do all of this manually, but it's quite helpful, I find, to have it in a data frame so that you can then just read it all in really quickly. Everybody still with me? Yeah, ooh, I didn't have the comparison on that one. Anyway, we can come back. So here we've got the key comparisons here is that we've added the boxes and the arrows into our plot. Last thing we want to do is give everything a bit of space to breathe. And you're probably thinking you also need some space to breathe at this point in the presentation. This has been a lot of information, but as I said, you can revisit all in your own time. And I hope it's been busy, but useful busy. So we're going to increase the line height within the plot. And that's just within the theme call. You can change the line height across the board. If you want to change the line height differently in the title and the subtitle, you can absolutely do that inside the element markdown calls that you've got there. We're going to reduce distractions. We've just changed the color of the grid. Let me just flip back so you can see the grid is just a wee bit more faded. Again, you don't want the grid to be the main thing that stands out. It's just there to be a useful tool. And we're going to check that everything fits. So the eagle-eyed among you will have noticed that we've chopped off a bit of the text box here. And that's because the plot is only taking into account the coordinates of the points and the coordinates of the box. The coordinate of that box is here. So it doesn't know in terms of setting the X limits that there's something sticking out over here. So we need to tell that manually. So we're just going to expand our Y axis. I quite like using the expansion and multiple way of doing that because it means if you're then working with different data that has different scales, you're still expanding it by the same amount proportionally to the rest of the plot. I just find that quite a helpful way of doing that. And there we go. So we're giving everything some space to breathe. You can see here it was fine, it had everything in it, but it was a wee bit all clumped together and this text box got chopped off. Whereas here, everything's just breathing a little bit more and still very legible, and it kind of invites you into the story. So we've applied our 7 tips of storytelling. I've summarized them here. And in using all of these tips, we've gone from this, which was a perfectly functional but slightly overwhelming ggplot, to this, which tells quite a nice story and allows us to see it. The key really is to figure out, did it work? So let's try and remember what happened in our first episode of the Great Penguin Bake Off. Which ripeness of banana produced non-tasty, the least tasty banana loaves? It was the green ones, yeah. So we can all remember unripe bananas, not good. Ripe bananas and overripe bananas, perfectly fine. Which banana loaf stayed in the oven for the least long? Do you remember which color was more towards the left side of the plot? Yeah, the overripe ones. So the overripe bananas didn't have to cook for quite as long. The runner-up used a ripe banana. The winner used an overripe banana. And what happened to the one that lost? It was an underripe banana, and it didn't leave it in the oven for long enough. So we've made up a totally ludicrous story, but we've built a plot in such a way that we can remember what that story was, and hopefully not get too attached to those poor penguins. But we wish them better luck in the next ventures. So there we go. We've made it to the end of the content that I had, and now it's really over to you for some questions and answers and maybe some feedback on your own plots. And there we go. So I've stopped the screen share.
Thank you so much for an absolutely wonderful presentation. There are so many things that I'm going to be going back to, you know, reread and like figure out what did she do there? Like that was really nifty. So I'm sure everybody really appreciated it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I have a few coworkers who will be sending this too, because I thought it was a very fun example as well.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I think Tyson has his hand raised to ask a question.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you. This was a very beautiful presentation, which I think is definitely part of the art of this, which is really fun. My question is maybe you can say, I don't really know or whatever, but I come from a more like academic background, and I'm producing plots for like a lot of peer review publications for the most part, sometimes presentations, which you have a little bit more flexibility on. How much of this stuff do you think works well for like an academic type plot?
Yes, so I think a lot of it does work well. I think, you know, the fonts that I chose were more goofy than the types of fonts that you would want to be picking from. And I'll fully acknowledge that. But I didn't go too wild. You know, I didn't change the backgrounds to be an awkward color to print. I didn't use any geometries that are a bit out there. You know, it was a scatter plot. It had a title and a subtitle. Yes, we got rid of the legend. You could easily pop that back in. That's absolutely fine. But I still think using color, sensible orientations, and trying to add some kind of text hierarchy is helpful. One of the things in the plots that I've been reworking recently have been, for example, if you're adding your p-values in, are the p-values the main story, or do you want people to remember the relative differences between measurements that you were taken? And we can have another discussion about whether p-values are the right thing to report or not. But you know, it's that kind of hierarchy of, okay, what is the most important thing, and what do I want people to remember when they look at this plot? So yeah, the font was too goofy for an academic publication. But the colors could work, and that whole notion of bringing out, some text more than others is also useful. Some of the time in the academic world, your title will be outside of the plot, and it will be something that the editors will be taking charge of. You can still apply some text hierarchy within the stuff that you're in control of, and so I think there are some tips here that I think you could use.
Thank you.
Shaw, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I have a small question. Do we have all kind of parameters available in the package like GG themes? Because if we have all of this in theme minimal or some other themes, do we have all these options in theme base of the GG themes or other packages? If you understood my question.
Yes, I think so. So I'm not entirely sure what the contents of your package is, but what I did in these plots is I set the theme to be theme minimal, and then I modified elements of the theme on top of that. So if you have a theme that your department uses, you can still modify stuff on top of that theme. So you can use that theme as your starting point, and then still change things to do with the text or the margins or whatever it is. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I will try that. Okay, thank you.
Great.
Looks
Do you
like
wanna go
Todd
for it,
has a
Todd?
question.
I don't have a question. I just want to thank Cara for coming and doing this. This was absolutely brilliant. This was
Oh,
priceless.
thank you.
Thank you for this fantastic presentation. Actually, I take it back. No, I don't want this to go to your head. This was awful. It was really useless information. No, thank you. Wonderful.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
And by the way, I was looking at your website, your
Uh-huh.
generative artwork. That's really good. I
Thank
really
you.
like that.
Thank you very much.
I guess I actually have a really quick question, which might just be an opinion, but I'm curious. I actually have hit a lot of pushback in some collaborators where they feel like everything should be in black and white unless there's like a definitive reason to use color. I was curious if you think that there's like always a place for color, or if there are times where we should just stick to like the very minimal color scheme.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I think if you stick to black and white, then you know it's going to work when you print it in black and white, right? But there are tools that we can use to help us see whether the colors that we're using work in black and white. If you do have to stick to a grayscale, I would still try and encourage you to think whether you can use some kind of semantics of your colors within that. So say you're increasing the dose of a drug or the size of an effect, you would want that to be in increasing darkness within your grayscale. But yeah, I think color makes plots more fun and more memorable, you know? And one of the things that I really enjoy doing is creating packages for teams that have standard colors in them. So then you could say, my research group uses these basic colors and modifications on them. And that allows you to publish, get plots ready very quickly, which are instantly recognizable as having come from your team, which I think you would struggle to do if it was all black and white. So you can set yourself a little bit of an identity with the types of colors that you want to use in your plots. So I would push back on that gently, provided that the colors that you're using still work if printed in black and white, if that's the main concern that the rest of the team have got.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Todd. It was a good suggestion to put together an online course. Yeah,
it's a legitimate, inappropriate question. Like, because if you put together that online course, I think I'm going to be obligated to sign up for it. So
thank you. I really appreciate that. So what I do, if you follow me on Twitter, I tend to tweet a lot about just these moments where you realize something didn't do what you thought it was going to do, but actually it was quite cool. Or you've been racking your brains trying to figure out why your plot's not rendering the way that it should, and you find the solution. So if you follow me on Twitter, you'll get a lot of content for free, in which I share some tips and tricks. A lot of the plots that I share, if I'm doing the Tidy Tuesday challenge, for example, will be way more wacky than the stuff that you want to be submitting for publication. But what that has taught me is how to manipulate basically every single aspect of a ggplot. I've created silly ones where you've got like alien emojis dancing around a map of Sydney, which was based on something to do with animals that have been spotted and not recognized. I've done stuff to do with flights where I've tried to make it look like the fumes that come out, all sorts of stuff. You won't be using that, but you could use the tips that have allowed me to manipulate the plot to get to that point. But no, I really appreciate the comment. Thank you very much.
yeah, I followed the artful bot. I have to follow you. Okay, I'm following you now.
Yeah, the artful bot was just an experiment. I kind of set that up while I was on mat leave to mostly play with GitHub Actions actually and see, can I get something to create a plot automatically every day without me having to do anything. So it's been a lot of fun playing around with that. But yeah, if you follow my main account, you'll get more useful content for this kind of stuff.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. This was really
You're
wonderful.
welcome. Thank you very much.
And I also just want to add that I really have this horrible craving for banana bread right now. Yeah, thank you
So
for that.
it worked. It worked.
Oh, no,
right? The story was memorable and it was sharing important stuff. Yeah, good.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I want to ask a question, which is, in academia, I think there's a little bit of tension between like, it's really great when you have like a really rich data set. And, I feel like scientific data visualizations can go kind of almost like one of two directions, where there's one direction that's like, can we see as many possible patterns in the data? Like, I really want to see kind of the raw data, so to speak, because that might be really complex and I might be able to see both really like global trends, but also micro trends. But then there's kind of another direction to go in, which is like more like the scientific communication angle of like, what do I want people to take away from this? What are the simple narratives that I want people to walk away with? And so, do you think that it's best to do both, or, how do you think about those? Do you try to match it to the audience?
Yeah, I think matching to the audience has always got to be the key, right? Any kind of communication you want to figure out. Communication is a two-way thing, but you've got to adapt your communication to the audience. So if you're presenting in a kind of public outreach way, you want to make sure that it has the key attraction that's probably going to be the story. So what is the main story of your data, and focus on that. You can show fairly complex data sets. So in the plot that we've just created, every single penguin in the Palmer Penguins data set was there. But we just highlighted the ones that we wanted to tell a story about, and we told a very simple story with the banana types and all that, it was silly, but so even in a fairly, it's not as rich a data set as the kind of stuff that you're going to be talking about, but there were a lot of data points that were visualized there. Yeah, I think I do see the beauty in having rich data presented. So if you go for, but then you get the tension between what editors want and what you think is actually more informative visualization sometimes. So, there's this whole thing about the evolution of the bar chart, which is worth having a look at in terms of going from a bar to like a rain cloud. And then you can see here are how the plots were dispersed rather than just taking the mean and the error bars, which actually a lot of people find difficult to interpret. If you put all the dots on there, I really like a bee swarm plot, which is, if you imagine a box plot, but instead of the box, you've got the dots that are put in with their relative, basically with the distribution. And then you can easily see, right, here's an outlier, here's a good clump of them, and then you can color your dots inside the box plot, which is just brilliant. So you can show, for example, that I don't know, that the chinstrap penguins tended to be slightly towards the top and the Adelie penguins tended to be towards the bottom. But if you look at the penguins as a whole, this is the shape that it takes. I found that, particularly when I was working in postgraduate medical education, to be a really useful tool when you're looking at things like how candidates do in different types of exams. This is how the candidates tend to do, and if you group them by different demographic factors, it moves around, but here's the general pattern. Having the bee swarm was way more easy for the surgeons or the other medics to interpret than having a box plot, which it's just a bit opaque. So I think if you can have the richness of your data in there, go for it, but you still want to tell the story well. And to do that, you highlight stuff, you bring in some hierarchy, and just experiment. We never get it. We don't always get it right, and we really never get it right the first time around. So make something, and if they say I have no idea what this means, then you need to rework it. But they might say, oh, actually that's really interesting, but never seen the data behind the pattern, and then you've opened up a whole new conversation about your data.
I especially liked your point that, what we did in your example was kind of a version of like showing the raw data set, but by all the annotation and highlighting, we told a fairly simple story. And so, it's not necessarily either or, like presenting really complicated data that's maybe hard to look at, or simple stories with exclusively simple visualization or something. So I thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Was anyone brave enough to bring their own plot along for us to have a look at?
I am, but I'm scared now.
Don't be scared. No.
Okay.
Don't be scared.
I'm happy to share something that I have. So let me pull it up.
Okay.
This is a visualization from, and it's a large visualization, so we'll have to scroll to see all of it, from I guess more than a year ago now. And it's from a manuscript where we were looking at occupational safety complaints in the US. OSHA is the Occupational Safety and Hazards Administration or something like that. And so we were looking at that and how it was correlated with COVID-19 deaths. And so this figure has 5 parts. We have like the US at the top, and then we have different regions of the US. So like here's the Northeast, and then the Midwest, and then like the South and the West. And then like we have different industries here. So we have, maybe I should have started with a real industry instead of other, but we have like other, retail, trade, manufacturing, and healthcare and social assistance. And we like collapsed a lot into other because we picked the retail, trade, manufacturing, and healthcare were pretty salient in terms of the industries that were really hard hit by COVID and that they like had a lot of complaints. And so there's a lot going on here. This is committing one of those like terrible sins of having 2 y-axes, but we wanted to show the correlation, you know, over time. And so I feel like we kind of did some of the text processing that you were talking about, where we automatically pulled out, you know, what the highest correlation lag time was, and then included the correlation row. So, you know, for this, it says like complaints were most correlated with deaths 16 days later, and then correlation of 0.86, and then, you know, so on and so forth for each of these. But it's, you know, it's like, it's kind of messy. And, you know, you see this really strong weekend effect in the data because complaints weren't sent in on the weekend, but it makes it very jarring to look at. So I'll stop saying things there and ask for your input.
No, I mean, I think you've done a really good job with the text automation, as you say. That's one of the things that I really like seeing people do, because it's one of those things that you could spend ages doing and manually, but you should automate that stuff. So well done on that. I like the color scheme actually. I think it works really well. It's a nice set of colors that you've picked. You know, the sin of the axes, it's okay. You can justify it if you've got useful data that you're showing. Something that I think would be useful, so you pointed out the weekend trend. I hadn't seen that, and that's probably because I don't have enough of your context. But I would suggest, I don't know if there's a way that you could add some days of the week, or if you could like just do, maybe just on the last one, you could you know, put an arrow in and then add something there to say that's the weekend. Or whatever that would, or you know, if you put, you could put a text box there that just said there's a consistent trend of a spike at the start of the week and a decrease at the end. That could work quite well. For your maps, I would fill them in, because I think that would make them a wee bit cleaner. And actually, if you have a pale border and a dark fill for the regions, it just, to me, it just makes it a simpler aesthetic to look at.
That makes sense.
And the other thing that I would suggest is clarifying what your squiggly line is. So, is that your average that you've referenced in the second axis?
Yeah, that's the second y-axis, the deaths per million. And I think I put that in the legend, you know, but it's down here and far away from what we were just looking at.
So that's the text hierarchy taking its toll. I didn't read that.
Right.
But yeah, so then what you can do, 2 options. You could try to like tie the color in. So for example, if you colored this text the same color as your squiggly line, then it would just draw them in and make it a bit easier to see what's there. The other thing that I think you should look into is, I think it's geom text path.
Oh yeah. I think that came out after I made this plot, but yeah.
Okay, probably, yeah. So the way that works is that it will recreate your line, but it allows you to add some text in it. So you probably don't want to put the full text that you've currently got here, but what you could do is just put, some text in that would point out what it is. I think that could work nicely. Yeah, good job.
I think I didn't really know a lot about GG text. So, you know, the idea of color coordinating elements of my plot with the axis text is not something I think I've thought about before. So that's really interesting to me. Yeah.
It's worth a shot. I think geom text path is probably your best bet in terms of making it really crystal clear. But yeah, if there's a way that you can do that, I think that could be good.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm aware that we're coming close to time. We've probably gone over time already, but if anyone else has any burning questions, I'm happy to take them. Ooh, what did I say about axis label sizes? It depends. So if the main story that your plot is telling is one of a trend, and the values in and of themselves are less important, then you can probably afford for those labels to be slightly smaller. If the values are actually really important, then you probably want them to stand out. So again, this is a kind of what's the story, what's the audience thing, but you can change all of that within the theme settings. So even if you're using a theme that's preset for your department, you can still modify that theme to change the axis labels and the size of them if you want to. Did that answer the question? Great, thank you.
I definitely see that some people have been dropping off, so I think we probably should wrap up pretty soon. Oh, I see there's one more question.
How can you approach when the data points are too large? You can change the size inside geom point. So you can set that size so that it's fixed. If size is another piece of useful encoded information, so say what I tend to do with Parliament penguins is the heavier the penguin, the larger the dot. And what you can do there is something similar to what I did with the alpha scale, that you can set the ranges of your size and make sure that they fit within the plot. You then get into stuff like playing with the size of the exported graph, etc., which we don't have time to cover, but I'll maybe see if I can pop a link to something useful your way.
Well, all right. I think we should probably wrap up there. Thank you again. It's been a wonderful pleasure to have you here. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure speaking to you all. It's been a really good event. Thank you very much.
Okay. See you. Bye.
Yeah, bye.